Every step Harper took left a trail of blood in the snow, a bright red beacon for the monsters hunting her. She thought she was running toward freedom, but fate has a cruel sense of humor. When she broke into that abandoned cabin at Dead Man's Drop, she didn't find safety. She found the territory of the two most feared men in the state. One is ice, the other is fire, and neither of them takes kindly to trespassers. What happens when a fugitive bride falls into the hands of the Mercer twins? This isn't a fairy tale. This is a hunt, and the prey has nowhere left to run. Freezing rain had turned the forest floor into a sheet of treacherous glass. Harper fell for the third time in an hour, her knees slamming against the unforgiving roots of an ancient oak. She bit through her lip to stifle a scream, the copper taste of blood flooding her mouth. She couldn't stop. Stopping meant being found. Being found meant being dragged back to the compound and forced into a claiming ceremony with Alpha Roderick, a man 3 times her age who viewed wives as breeding stock and nothing more. Her father, Tobias, had sold her. That was the raw, ugly truth of it. Tobias had racked up gambling debts at the underground poker tables in the city, and when he couldn't pay in cash, he paid in bloodline. Harper was the currency. Scrambling to her feet, Harper pulled her thin denim jacket tighter around her shivering frame. It was wholly insufficient for a mid-December storm in the mountains of Washington, but it was all she had grabbed when she climbed out her bedroom window. "Keep moving," she whispered to herself, her breath puffing out in white clouds. "Just cross the ridge." The ridge was known as Dead Man's Drop. It was a jagged scar of rock that marked the end of Roderick's territory and the beginning of the no man's land, a buffer zone between the warring packs of the north. Rumors said the land was cursed. Other rumors said it belonged to the Mercer Pack, a reclusive clan run by twin alphas known for their brutality. Harper didn't care about rumors. She only cared that Roderick's trackers wouldn't follow her into disputed territory without backup. Night was falling fast, a heavy curtain of charcoal and sleet. Her vision blurred. Hypothermia was setting in. She could feel the dangerous lethargy creeping into her limbs, making her fingers numb and her thoughts slow. Then she saw it. Through a break in the pines, a structure loomed. It was a cabin, built of dark, rough-hewn timber, sitting dangerously close to the edge of the ravine. No smoke rose from the chimney. No tire tracks marred the pristine snow leading up to the porch. The windows were dark, staring out like hollow eyes. Abandoned. A sob of relief tore from her throat. She stumbled forward, her boots slipping on the icy incline. She reached the porch steps and hauled herself up, collapsing against the heavy wooden door. It was locked, of course. Harper fumbled in her pocket for the small multi-tool she'd stolen from her father's garage. Her fingers were stiff, clumsy blocks of ice, but fear was a powerful motivator. She jammed the flathead into the lock mechanism, wiggling it with desperate force. Click. The tumblers gave way. The door groaned open, revealing a pitch-black interior. She stumbled inside and slammed the door shut against the howling wind. The silence inside was instant and heavy. The air here was stale, cold, but dry. She didn't dare turn on a light, even if there was electricity. Feeling her way along the wall, she found a heavy velvet curtain and collapsed onto a dusty rug beneath a window. She curled into a tight ball, her teeth chattering so violently her jaw ached. She was safe for now. Just for tonight. Tomorrow, she would figure out how to disappear forever. But as sleep dragged her under, Harper failed to notice one crucial detail. The air didn't smell like mildew and rot, as an abandoned cabin should. Beneath the dust, there was a faint, lingering scent of sandalwood and high-octane gasoline, the scent of ownership. The rumble of a V8 engine shattered the morning silence. Harper woke with a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The storm had passed, leaving behind a blindingly bright morning sun that sliced through the gaps in the curtains. But the sound that woke her wasn't the weather. It was the crunch of heavy tires on gravel directly outside the front door. She scrambled backward, pressing herself into the corner of the room. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. Roderick found me. She looked around frantically for a weapon. The cabin was sparsely furnished, a leather couch, a massive oak table, a cold fireplace. On the table sat a heavy crystal ashtray. She lunged for it, gripping it with both hands, and ducked behind the kitchen island just as the front door handle turned. The door swung open with confidence. "I told you the storm would knock out the power line on the North Ridge," a deep, baritone voice rumbled. "The security system is offline." "Which is why we're here, Kieran. To fix it. Stop complaining," a second voice replied. This one was almost identical in pitch, but carried a rougher, more impatient edge. Harper held her breath, her lungs burning. Two of them. Heavy boots thudded against the hardwood floor. They weren't moving like trackers searching for prey. They were moving like men walking into their own living room. "Something's off," the first voice, Kieran, said. The footsteps stopped. "The draft?" "No, the smell." Harper squeezed her eyes shut. She had been running for 2 days without a shower. The scent of fear, sweat, and cheap soap was likely radiating off her. "Vanilla and distressed omega," the second man said. His voice dropped an octave, shifting from annoyed to predatory. "We have a guest, Lachlan." "In our cabin?" The sound of a gun slide being racked echoed in the large room. "Come out!" Lachlan roared, his voice shaking the dust motes in the air. "We can hear your heart beating, little rabbit. Don't make me drag you out." Harper knew when she was beaten. If they were wolves, and their heightened senses proved they were, she couldn't outrun them, and she certainly couldn't fight them. She stood up slowly from behind the island, holding the crystal ashtray like a shield. 2 men stood in the doorway, backlit by the winter sun. They were massive, towering well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against their dark tactical jackets. They had the same sharp jawlines, the same raven-black hair, and the same predatory stillness. But their eyes were different. The one on the left, Kieran, had eyes of cool, calculating grey. The one on the right, holding a matte black pistol at his side, had eyes of burning amber. Lachlan Mercer. Kieran Mercer. Harper's blood ran cold. She hadn't broken into a neutral safe house. She had broken into the private retreat of the alphas of the Obsidian Ridge Pack, the sworn enemies of her father's pack. "Put the ashtray down, sweetheart," Kieran said calmly, leaning against the doorframe and crossing his arms. He looked more amused than threatened. "That's Italian crystal. It's worth more than your shoes." "Who are you?" Lachlan demanded, stepping forward. He holstered the gun but didn't relax his stance. He sniffed the air, his nose wrinkling. "You reek of Roderick's territory. Are you a spy?" "No," Harper said, her voice trembling but defiant. "I'm not a spy. I'm just leaving." "Leaving?" Kieran raised an eyebrow. "You just got here, and you broke our lock." "I'll pay for it," Harper blurted out, though she had exactly $12 in her pocket. Lachlan laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You'll pay for it? With what? You look like you haven't eaten in a week." He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. Harper flinched, backing up until her hips hit the counter. Lachlan stopped inches from her, his amber eyes scanning her face, dropping to her neck. He inhaled sharply. "She's unmarked," Lachlan said, glancing back at his twin. "An unbonded female from Roderick's pack, hiding in our cabin, smelling like terror." Kieran moved then, slower, more fluidly than his brother. He came to stand beside Lachlan, creating a wall of muscle and heat that boxed Harper in. "Why are you running, little rabbit?" Kieran asked softly. "My name isn't Rabbit," she snapped, "and my business is my own." "You are on Obsidian Land," Kieran countered, his voice dropping to a silken threat. "Your business became ours the moment you crossed the threshold. Now tell us the truth, or we call Alpha Roderick and tell him we found his stray." "No!" Harper screamed, the word tearing out of her before she could stop it. She dropped the ashtray. It clattered loudly on the counter. "Please, anything but that. Kill me if you want, but don't send me back to him." The twins exchanged a look. A silent conversation passed between them, a quirk of a brow, a tightening of a jaw. "He wants to mate her," Lachlan muttered, looking at Harper with a new expression. It wasn't pity. It was possessiveness. "He's hunting her." "I'd rather die," Harper whispered, tears finally spilling over. Kieran reached out, his large hand tilting her chin up. His touch was electric, sending a jolt of warmth through her frozen system. "We aren't going to kill you," he said. "But you aren't leaving either. A storm is coming back around. A bad one. You're stuck here with us." "And," Lachlan added, a wicked grin spreading across his face, "we have a strict policy about trespassers. They have to work off their debt." The cabin was no longer a refuge. It was a cage. But at least it was a warm one. 3 hours had passed since the twins arrived. In that time, the weather had turned violent again, a whiteout blizzard slamming against the mountain with enough force to shake the timber walls. Harper sat on the leather couch, a thick wool blanket wrapped around her. She held a mug of hot broth that Kieran had prepared. It was strange. For ruthless alphas, they were surprisingly domestic. Kieran had fired up the generator, turned on the heating, and cooked a simple meal, while Lachlan had spent the time pacing the perimeter and securing the windows. "Drink it all," Kieran ordered from the armchair opposite her. He was cleaning a hunting knife with a rag, his grey eyes never leaving her face. "You're malnourished. Roderick doesn't feed his people?" "He feeds the ones who are useful," Harper murmured into the cup. "My father, he isn't useful anymore. And neither was I, until Roderick decided he needed a young wife to produce an heir." Lachlan walked in from the kitchen, tossing an apple in the air and catching it. He sat on the arm of Kieran's chair. "So you're Tobias's girl, Harper, right?" Harper stiffened. "How do you know my father?" "Everyone knows Tobias," Lachlan scoffed. "The man who can't hold his liquor or his poker face. He owes us money, too." Harper closed her eyes, shame burning her cheeks. "Of course he does." "We don't care about the money," Kieran said dismissively. "But having his daughter, that presents an opportunity." Harper lowered the mug. "What kind of opportunity?" "Roderick has been encroaching on our borders for months," Kieran explained, setting the knife down. "Testing our defenses. If we hold you, we have leverage. He can't attack if his intended mate is in our custody." "He won't care," Harper said bitterly. "He has too much pride. If he knows I'm here, he won't negotiate. He'll just come for me to prove he can take what's his." "Let him come," Lachlan growled, his eyes flashing gold. "I've been itching to tear his throat out since the Peace Summit of 24. "You don't understand," Harper insisted, leaning forward. "He has something new, a weapon, or a drug. I heard him talking to his beta about it before I ran. It suppresses the wolf spirit. He plans to use it on your pack." The room went deadly silent. The twins froze. "Explain," Kieran commanded, his voice devoid of warmth. "I don't know the details," Harper stammered. "I just heard them say wolf's bane derivative and water supply." They want to poison the creek that runs down to your main settlement." Lachlan stood up abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. "That bastard!" Kieran looked at Harper, his gaze piercing. He was weighing her words, checking her heart rate, smelling for the scent of deceit. "If you are lying to save your own skin, Harper, the consequences will be severe." "I'm not lying," she said, holding his gaze. "I hate him more than you do." Kieran stood up and walked over to her. He loomed over the couch, placing a hand on the backrest behind her head. The proximity was overwhelming. She could smell the pine and rain scent of him, mixed with a deep, masculine musk that made her wolf stir deep inside her, something that hadn't happened in years. "We believe you," Kieran said softly. "But this changes things," Lachlan said, moving to stand on her other side. "If he's planning chemical warfare, we can't just use you as leverage. We need to go on the offensive." "And you," Kieran looked down at her, his eyes dropping to her lips, "are going to help us map out his compound." "I can't go back there," Harper whispered. "You won't go back," Lachlan said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You're under our protection now." "Why?" she asked. "I'm nothing to you." Kieran leaned down, his face inches from hers. "Because, Harper, when we walked in that door, my wolf didn't want to kill you. He wanted to keep you, and my brother feels the same." Harper's breath hitched. Twins sharing a mate was rare, almost a myth. It only happened with the most powerful of alpha bloodlines. "We don't share toys," Lachlan murmured, his hand brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. "But we share everything that matters. And until this storm breaks, you belong to us." Before Harper could process the weight of that declaration, a heavy thud echoed from the front porch. Then came the sound of wood splintering. Someone was trying to break in. Lachlan had his gun drawn in a split second. Kieran grabbed Harper, pulling her off the couch and shoving her behind the heavy stone fireplace. "Stay down," Kieran hissed. "Roderick?" she asked, terrified. "No," Kieran said, sniffing the air, his face twisting in confusion. "It doesn't smell like wolf. It smells dead." The front door didn't just open, it exploded inward. Splinters of oak rained down like confetti as a massive shape barreled into the room. It wasn't a wolf, and it wasn't quite a man. It was a grotesque hybrid, a creature stuck mid-shift, its bones audibly cracking as it moved. Its skin was pale, translucent, and covered in weeping sores. "Hollows!" Lachlan shouted, firing 2 controlled shots into the creature's chest. The creature didn't even flinch. It let out a gurgling shriek and lunged at Lachlan. From behind the fireplace, Harper watched in horror. She had heard whispers about the Hollows, failed experiments from the underground labs, wolves whose DNA had been corrupted by synthetic drugs until their minds rotted away. They felt no pain. They had no soul. They were just hunger wrapped in skin. Kieran didn't hesitate. A low, vibrating growl tore from his chest, shaking the floorboards. In a blur of motion, his clothes shredded as he shifted. He didn't shift into a normal wolf. He shifted into a massive, midnight black beast, easily the size of a pony, with silver fur frosting his muzzle. The Black Alpha. Kieran collided with the hollow creature in mid-air, his jaws snapping around the thing's throat. Dark, oily blood sprayed across the pristine rug. But there were more. 2 more of the pale monsters scrambled through the broken doorway, their eyes milky white and blind. They navigated by scent, and right now the cabin smelled of fresh blood. "Get back!" Lachlan roared at Harper, abandoning his gun as one of the creatures knocked it from his hand. He pulled a combat knife from his boot, a K-bar with a serrated edge, and slashed at the attacker's eyes. Harper pressed herself against the cold stone of the chimney, her hands trembling. She spotted Lachlan's gun sliding across the floor, coming to a stop near the kitchen island. Lachlan was grappling with the larger of the two new intruders. The creature had him pinned against the wall, its claws digging into his shoulder. Kieran was busy tearing the first one apart, but the third hollow was creeping toward the fireplace, toward Harper. It sniffed the air, its jaw unhinging to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. Harper didn't think. She moved. She scrambled on her hands and knees, diving for the gun. The hollow screeched and pounced. Harper's fingers wrapped around the cold steel of the grip. She rolled onto her back, raised the heavy weapon with both hands, and pulled the trigger. Bang! The recoil nearly dislocated her shoulder. The bullet took the hollow in the shoulder, spinning it around but not stopping it. It turned back to her, snarling. Bang! Bang! 2 more shots. One hit the neck, the other shattered its knee. The creature collapsed, writhing on the floor. Suddenly, silence fell. Kieran stood over the remains of the first attacker, panting heavily. Lachlan had dispatched the second one and was wiping black ichor from his knife. Both brothers turned to look at Harper, who was still lying on the floor, the smoking gun pointed at the door. Lachlan walked over, his expression unreadable. He gently reached down and took the gun from her shaking hands. "Safety was off," he murmured, clicking it back on. "Good shooting, Rabbit." Kieran shifted back. The transition was gruesome and beautiful, bones snapping back into place until he stood there, naked and bloody, but unashamed. He grabbed a throw blanket from the couch and wrapped it around his waist. "Are you hurt?" Kieran asked, his voice rough from the shift. "No," Harper breathed. What were those things?" "Roderick's useful pets," Kieran spat, looking at the bodies with disgust. "He's not just poisoning water. He's bioengineering soldiers. Those things were wolves once." Lachlan kicked one of the bodies over. "They have trackers embedded in their necks. Look." He used the tip of his knife to dig out a small metallic chip, blinking with a faint red light. Standard military grade, probably sourced from a private contractor like Blackwell Security. "Blackwell?" Harper gasped. "My father mentioned a meeting with a man named Blackwell. I thought he was a loan shark." "Worse," Lachlan said grimly. "He's a mercenary supplier. If Roderick is working with Blackwell, this isn't a pack war anymore. It's an extermination." Kieran swayed suddenly. He gripped the back of the couch, his knuckles turning white. His skin, usually a healthy olive tone, was turning a sickly shade of grey. "Kieran?" Harper scrambled up. "I'm fine," he grunted, but his legs buckled. Lachlan caught him before he hit the floor. "He's burning up." Harper looked at Kieran's arm. There was a shallow scratch, barely 3 inches long, where the first hollow had swiped him. The wound wasn't bleeding red. It was oozing a purple frothy liquid. "The poison," Harper whispered, horror dawning on her. "It wasn't just for the water. Their claws. They're coated in it." Lachlan looked at his twin, then at the raging storm outside. The blizzard had intensified. Visibility was 0. There was no way to get him to a hospital or the pack healer. "We have to treat him here," Lachlan said, his voice tight with suppressed panic. "Harper, boil water. Find the whiskey. We need to cauterize it." "Cauterizing won't work if it's in his bloodstream," Harper argued, her mind racing. She had spent years reading her mother's old medical journals. Her mother had been the pack healer before she died. "If it's wolfsbane-based, heat makes it spread faster. We need to slow his heart rate. We need ice." Lachlan hesitated, looking at his dying brother. "If you're wrong, he dies." "If we do nothing, he dies!" Harper yelled, grabbing Lachlan's arm. "Trust me, please." Lachlan looked into her eyes. For a second, the amber fire in his gaze softened. "Okay." do it. The next 6 hours were a blur of agony and ice. They had moved Kieran to the master bedroom. The room was freezing. Harper had insisted they open the window to let the winter air in, packing snow around the wound on Kieran's arm. Kieran was delirious. The poison was fighting his wolf's natural healing ability, creating a metabolic war inside his body. He tossed and turned, muttering names of people long dead, growling at unseen enemies. Harper sat by the bed, wringing out a cold cloth and pressing it to his forehead. Her hands were numb, but she didn't stop. Lachlan paced the room like a caged tiger. Every few minutes, he would stop and touch Kieran's hand, as if checking he was still there. The bond between them was palpable. When Kieran winced, Lachlan flinched. When Kieran's breathing hitched, Lachlan stopped breathing. "Why are you helping us?" Lachlan asked suddenly, his back to her. "You could have run when the Hollows attacked. You had the gun." Harper looked down at Kieran's sleeping face. Even in pain, he was beautiful. Sharp cheekbones, thick lashes, a mouth that looked like it was made for stern commands, but felt soft against her skin. "I told you," she said quietly. "I'm not my father. I don't sell people." Lachlan turned around. He looked exhausted. The arrogant alpha was gone, replaced by a worried brother. He walked over to the side of the bed and sat down, his knee brushing against hers. "We were born in a storm like this," Lachlan said, his voice low. "Our mother didn't make it. Our father blamed us. Said 2 alphas in one womb was an abomination. He pitted us against each other, forced us to fight for food, for warmth. He wanted one strong heir, so he tried to make us kill the other." Harper's heart broke. "That's barbaric." "That's our world," Lachlan corrected. "But we refused. We fought back to back instead of face to face. We killed him when we were 16 and took the pack." He looked at Kieran. "I can't lose him, Harper. I am the sword, but he is the shield. I don't know how to exist without him." "You won't have to," Harper said firmly. She lifted the cloth. "Look." Around the scratch on Kieran's arm, the purple discoloration was fading. The swelling had gone down. The ice had slowed the circulation enough for his immune system to isolate the toxin. Kieran groaned, his eyelids fluttering open. The grey eyes were hazy, but the madness was gone. "Lachlan?" he croaked. "I'm here, brother." Lachlan gripped his hand, relief washing over his face so intensely he looked like he might cry. Kieran shifted his gaze to Harper. He looked at her with a clarity that made her breath catch. You stayed." "I stayed," she nodded. "She saved you," Lachlan added, his voice thick with emotion. "She took command. She knew what to do." Kieran reached out, his hand shaking slightly, and covered Harper's hand where it rested on the bedspread. "Why?" "Because," Harper whispered, I think I finally found the place where I'm supposed to be." The moment hung in the air, charged with electricity. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the recognition of a mate bond snapping into place. The 3 of them, fire, ice, and the storm that brought them together. But the peace was short-lived. A high-pitched beep echoed from the living room. It was the security console. Lachlan was on his feet instantly. "The power is back. The sensors are resetting." He ran into the main room, Harper following close behind. Lachlan stared at the grainy security monitor mounted on the wall. The storm had broken, leaving the moon to illuminate the snow-covered clearing outside. The monitor showed movement. Not wolves, vehicles. 3 black armored SUVs were idling at the edge of the tree line. The logo on the side door was visible in the moonlight, a stylized sword and shield. Vanguard Solutions. "Mercenaries," Lachlan cursed. "Human mercenaries. That's why I couldn't smell them until they were close." "They're setting up a perimeter," Kieran said from the doorway. He was leaning against the frame, pale and weak, but standing. He had pulled on a fresh pair of jeans. They aren't here to breach. They're here to siege. They want to burn us out, Harper realized. If they set fire to the cabin, we force them to fight on our terms, Lachlan said, checking the magazine of his pistol. But Kieran can't fight, not like this. I can fight, Kieran argued, though his voice lacked its usual power. No, Harper interrupted. She walked over to the window, peering through the crack in the curtains. You can't, but I can get us out. Both men looked at her. How? Lachlan asked. My father, Harper said, her voice turning cold. He owes money to everyone, right? Including the man who runs Vanguard Solutions. I met the commander once at a gala. His name is Commander Vane. He has a code. He doesn't kill non-combatants. You are not going out there, Kieran growled. Absolutely not. If I go out there and surrender, Harper said, turning to face them, they will take me to Roderick. They'll leave you alone because their contract is just to retrieve the girl. We are not trading you for our lives, Lachlan shouted, slamming his hand on the table. No, Harper said, a dangerous glint in her eye. You're not trading me. I'm the bait. You let them take me. You let them drive me right into Roderick's bunker. And then, she pointed to the tracking chip they had cut out of the hollow earlier. You follow me. It's suicide, Kieran said. It's a Trojan horse, Harper corrected. Roderick thinks I'm a helpless girl. He won't expect me to be carrying a way to disable his security system from the inside. She pulled the multi-tool from her pocket, the same one she used to break into the cabin. I know Roderick's compound. I grew up playing in the vents. I can shut down the perimeter grid. Once the grid is down, the obsidian pack can flood in, Lachlan finished the thought, a slow smile spreading across his face. We can slaughter them all. Exactly, Harper said. But you have to let them take me. You have to trust me. The twins looked at each other. The bond between them vibrated with indecision, fear, and admiration. If they hurt you, Kieran warned, stepping forward and gripping her shoulders, if they touch one hair on your head, then you'll burn the world down, Harper said softly. I know. She leaned up and pressed a kiss to Kieran's cheek, then turned and did the same to Lachlan. It was a promise, a seal. Open the door, she said. Lachlan unlocked the deadbolt. He opened the heavy wooden door. Harper stepped out onto the porch, her hands raised in the air. The red laser sights of a dozen rifles instantly centered on her chest. I am Harper Vance, she screamed into the cold night air. Take me to Alpha Roderick. The interior of the armored SUV smelled of stale coffee, gun oil, and the sharp metallic tang of indifference. Harper sat in the back seat, her wrists bound tight with plastic zip ties that bit into her skin. Flanked by two silent operatives from Vanguard Solutions, she stared straight ahead, refusing to let them see her tremble. Commander Vane sat in the front passenger seat, the glow of a tablet illuminating his scarred face. He was a terrifying man, not because he was a monster, but because he was a professional. To him, this wasn't a kidnapping. It was a logistics invoice. You're shaking, Vane observed without looking up from his screen. His voice was dry, devoid of mockery. Cold? Or are you finally regretting your decision to play the martyr? Harper dug her fingernails into her palms, using the sharp pain to ground herself. She thought of Kieran, burning with fever in the cabin. She thought of Lachlan's desperate eyes as he locked the door behind her. Anticipation, Harper lied, forcing her voice to remain steady. Vane glanced back, a flicker of amusement dancing in his eyes. You have a strange definition of fun, Miss Vance. The convoy wound its way down the treacherous mountain roads, leaving the pristine, wild forests of the Mercer lands behind. As they crossed the border into Roderick's territory, the world changed. The ancient pines gave way to clear-cut stumps that looked like gravestones in the snow. The air grew heavier, thick with the smog of industry. Roderick didn't respect the land. He consumed it. His territory was a scar on the face of the mountain, a sprawling complex of concrete bunkers, high chain-link fences topped with razor wire, and the constant, thrumming vibration of underground machinery. "Package secured," Vane spoke into his radio as the massive steel gates of the compound loomed ahead. "We are inbound. Open the main gate." The heavy doors groaned open with a screech of metal on metal. The courtyard inside was a fortress, swarming with Roderick's wolves and additional mercenary units. Harsh halogen floodlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the steam rising from the ventilation shafts of the underground labs. It looked less like a pack home and more like a prison. The SUV ground to a halt at the base of the main house, a gaudy, neo-classical mansion that looked grotesquely out of place amidst the industrial squalor. "Get out!" a guard barked, yanking the rear door open. He grabbed Harper's arm with bruising force, hauling her out into the slush. Her boots soaked through instantly. The wind whipped her hair across her face, blinding her for a moment. When she brushed it away, she saw him. Alpha Roderick stood at the top of the marble stairs, framed by the grand entrance like a king surveying his subjects. He wore a tailored silk suit that cost more than most of his pack members earned in a year, holding a glass of amber liquid in one hand. He looked every bit the corrupt monarch he was, handsome in a sharp, cruel way, but with eyes as empty as a shark's. "Look who decided to come home," Roderick sneered, his voice dripping with false warmth as he slowly descended the stairs. He ignored the mercenaries completely. His predatory focus was locked entirely on Harper. "I was beginning to think you'd frozen to death on the ridge. A tragic end for such a valuable asset." "I survived," Harper said, lifting her chin and meeting his gaze. "No thanks to you." Roderick stopped on the bottom step. The smile didn't leave his face, but his eyes hardened. "Survival is a privilege, Harper. One I grant." He moved faster than a human could track. His hand lashed out, backhanding her across the face. The blow was heavy and precise, knocking her off her feet and into the wet snow. Pain exploded in her jaw. She tasted the copper tang of blood. But she didn't cry out. She didn't beg. She stayed on the ground for a second, staring up at the grey sky, letting the anger crystallize into something cold and hard in her chest. "Enjoy it," she thought, wiping her bloody lip. "That is the last time you will ever touch me." "Take her to the bridal suite," Roderick commanded, turning his back on her. He gestured to his beta, a brute named Jax who was watching with a cruel grin. "Clean her up. The ceremony is at dawn. I want this alliance sealed before the Mercers realize what hit them." "About the Mercers," Commander Vane stepped forward, holstering his sidearm and interposing himself between Roderick and the house. "My scouts report heat signatures moving on the north ridge. You might want to double the perimeter guard." Roderick waved a dismissive hand, laughing softly. "Let them come. They are two boys playing at war. I have the hollows. I have the girl. They won't get past the first gate without my permission." He was wrong. He was so tragically, arrogantly wrong. Harper was hauled to her feet by Jax and dragged into the mansion. They marched her past the terrified kitchen staff, up the sweeping marble staircase, and down the long, red-carpeted hallway. They threw her into a room at the end of the hall, the bridal suite. It was a gilded cage. The room was opulent, filled with antique furniture and heavy velvet drapes, but the windows were reinforced with steel bars, and the heavy door had a deadbolt that only locked from the outside. Jax cut the zip ties on her wrists. "Don't get any ideas, Princess," he grunted. "There's a guard at the end of the hall." He slammed the door. The lock clicked with a sound like a gunshot. Harper stood in the center of the room, listening to his footsteps fade. The moment silence fell, her demeanor shifted. The trembling victim vanished. The saboteur emerged. She knew this room. It wasn't always a bridal suite. Years ago, before Roderick seized power, this had been her father's private study. She had spent her childhood hiding under the desk while he worked. She knew its secrets. She didn't go to the ensuite bathroom to wash the blood off her face. Instead, she went straight to the ornate brass ventilation grate near the ceiling. This house had been built in the 70s, and her father had insisted on a quirky, direct airflow system to keep his server room in the basement cool. He had always complained about the draft. Now, that draft was her lifeline. Harper sat on the floor and pulled off her right boot. Hidden deep inside the lining, pressed against her ankle, was the small multi-tool she had stolen days ago. The guards had patted her down for weapons, but they hadn't checked her shoes. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the screwdriver head. She dragged a heavy armchair over to the wall, climbed up, and began to work on the screws. 1, 2, 3, 4. The grate came loose with a clatter she barely managed to muffle. Harper pulled herself up, wincing as the sharp metal edge scraped her stomach. The duct was tight, dark, and smelled of decades-old dust and mold. She shimmied forward, crawling on her elbows. It was a claustrophobic nightmare. Cobwebs brushed against her face, and the air was thin. Left at the junction, straight for 20 feet, down the vertical shaft. She counted the turns, relying on muscle memory from a game of hide-and-seek she hadn't played in 15 years. 10 minutes later, she was peering through a slotted grate into the basement server room. It was bathed in the humming blue light of the server racks, and, just as she had hoped, it was unmanned. Roderick relied too heavily on his digital firewalls. He didn't think anyone could get inside the physical heart of his operation. Harper kicked the grate open. It fell to the floor with a loud clang. She dropped down after it, landing in a crouch. She wasted no time. She sprinted to the main console, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Enter password. Panic flared in her chest. She had minutes, maybe seconds, before the noise attracted a patrol. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to think like him. Think like a narcissist, she typed. Alpha Supremo 1, access denied. She swore under her breath. She tried again. Roderick King, access denied. Think, she whispered, sweat beading on her forehead. What does he want more than anything? She thought back to the conversation she overheard before she ran. Roderick didn't just want power. He wanted immortality. He wanted a legacy that would outlast him. That was why he needed her. Not for love, but for a bloodline. She typed, Dynasty, access granted. Green text spilled across the screen, reflecting in her eyes. Got you, she hissed. She worked with frantic precision, her fingers flying across the keys. First, the perimeter. She accessed the external defense grid and typed in the override command. Perimeter. Fence. Deactivated. Next, the eyes. She pulled up the camera feed loop she had prepared in her mind. With a few keystrokes, she froze the image of the empty forest on all screens in the security office. To the guards, the night would look quiet and peaceful. They wouldn't see the army advancing through the snow. And finally, the monster in the basement. She found the file labeled Project Hollow. Her finger hovered over the enter key. These creatures were victims, twisted by science. But right now, they were weapons. If Roderick unleashed them, the Mercer Pack would be slaughtered. She initiated the Containment Purge protocol. This wouldn't kill them, but it would trigger the emergency lockdown seals on their holding pens. They would be trapped in the lower levels, unable to join the fight. She hit enter. The reaction was instant. A siren began to wail, not an intrusion alarm, but the deep, mournful sound of a system reboot. The overhead lights in the server room flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness before the emergency red lights bathed the hallways in the color of blood. The hum of the ventilation system stopped. The electric buzz of the fence outside silenced. The fortress was blind. The fortress was deaf. And then, from outside the thick concrete walls, a sound pierced the night. It wasn't a siren, it wasn't a machine, it was a howl, long, mournful, and terrifyingly loud. Then another joined it, and another, until the air vibrated with the chorus of 100 wolves. The Obsidian Pack was here, and the door was wide open. The system purge didn't just shut down the computer, it sent a shockwave through the mansion's electrical grid that blew out the transformers in the basement. The floor beneath Harper's feet buckled as a dull boom echoed through the ventilation shafts, followed by the high-pitched whine of dying electronics. For a heartbeat, there was total darkness in the server room. Then, the emergency backup kicked in, bathing the windowless space in a pulsing, crimson light that made the shadows dance like demons. Harper barely had time to catch her breath before the heavy steel door burst open. "System failure! Hard reboot, now!" a voice roared. Two of Roderick's elite guards stormed in, their tactical flashlights cutting through the red haze. They were looking for a glitch, a malfunction. They weren't expecting a girl armed with a fire extinguisher and a lifetime of repressed rage. Harper held her breath, pressing her back against the warm metal of the server rack. She could hear the blood rushing in her ears, louder than the chaos outside. "I am not a victim," she told herself. Not anymore. The beam of a flashlight swept over her boot. "Intruder!" the guard shouted, raising his rifle. Harper didn't hesitate. She swung the heavy red canister with every ounce of strength she possessed. It connected with the first guard's helmet with a sickening, metallic crunch. The impact jarred her arms all the way to her shoulders, but the man went down hard, his rifle clattering across the linoleum. The second guard spun around, his eyes wide behind his tactical goggles. He raised his weapon, but the close quarters worked against him. Harper yanked the safety pin on the extinguisher and squeezed the trigger. A blast of chemical foam erupted, blinding him instantly. He choked, clawing at his face, stumbling backward into the servers. Harper didn't wait to see him fall. She swung the canister again, driving it into his gut to ensure he stayed down. He collapsed, wheezing. Trembling, Harper dropped the canister. Her hands were shaking violently, but her mind was crystal clear. She crouched over the first guard, patting down his vest until her fingers closed around the cold steel of a semi-automatic pistol. She checked the chamber, loaded, and grabbed his radio. "Perimeter breach," a panicked voice crackled over the radio. "They're inside the walls. I repeat, the Obsidian Pack is inside the walls." Harper scrambled to her feet. She had opened the gates. Now she had to survive the flood. She sprinted into the hallway. The mansion, once a silent tomb of oppression, was now a sinking ship. Staff members were running in every direction, clutching files and valuables, abandoning their posts. Roderick ruled through fear, not loyalty. Now that the fear of the Mercers outweighed the fear of Roderick, his empire was crumbling. Harper reached the main staircase. Through the 2-story windows that overlooked the courtyard, she saw the war. It was a scene of terrifying beauty. The floodlights had died with the power, leaving the battlefield illuminated only by the moon and the frenetic strobe of muzzle flashes. But the guns were falling silent, one by one. The mercenaries from Vanguard Solutions were retreating. Commander Vane was a businessman, and he knew a bad investment when he saw one. His armored SUVs were already peeling away, leaving Roderick's personal guard to fend for themselves. And they were losing. A tide of wolves poured over the disabled perimeter walls. They moved with a synchronized lethality that spoke of a pack united by blood and bond, not a payroll. At the center of the storm were two beasts that made the others look like pups. One was a nightmare of midnight fur and muscle. Kieran. Even from this distance, Harper could see he was favoring his left side, the poison from the hollow still lingering in his veins. He was the shield, absorbing the attacks, holding the line. The other was a blur of russet and gold. Lachlan. He was the sword. He moved around his brother in a protective orbit, his jaws snapping, tearing through anyone foolish enough to get close to his twin. Harper shoved the heavy oak front doors open and stepped out into the freezing night. The air smelled of ozone, copper, and wet fur. The sound was deafening. Snarls, screams, and the crunch of breaking bones. But as she stepped onto the porch, a strange hush began to ripple outward from the center of the courtyard. The fighting stopped. The circle formed. In the middle of the carnage, a massive, scarred, grey wolf stood panting. It was Roderick. He was huge, a relic of a violent past. But he was alone. His guards lay broken in the snow or were on their knees, baring their throats in submission to the obsidian warriors. Roderick's yellow eyes darted around, wild and desperate. He locked onto the one thing he thought he could still destroy. Kieran. The black wolf had stumbled, his legs finally giving way to the exhaustion of the poison. He went down on one knee, his flank heaving. Lachlan was busy dispatching a final guard 10 yards away. Roderick saw the opening. He didn't growl, he just launched himself. A silent, lethal missile aimed directly at Kieran's exposed throat. Time seemed to slow down. Lachlan howled, turning too late. Kieran bared his teeth, bracing for an impact he was too weak to counter. No! The scream tore from Harper's throat, raw and primal. She raised the stolen gun, leveling it with both hands. She didn't aim for the head, she aimed for the noise. She fired a single shot into the air. Crack! The sound was like a thunderclap in the silent courtyard. Roderick flinched, the sudden noise breaking his predatory focus. He landed clumsily in the snow, inches from Kieran, and whipped his head around. He saw her. Harper Vance stood on the steps of the mansion he had stolen, holding a gun she had taken from his guard, wearing clothes he had forced her into. But the look in her eyes wasn't fear. It was judgment. Roderick huffed, a sound of disbelief, and the shift took him. Bones rearranged with sickening pops as he melted back into human form. He stood up, naked, shivering, and covered in the blood of men better than him. "You!" Roderick spat, his voice ragged. He pointed a trembling finger at her. "You did this. You shut down the grid." Harper walked down the stone steps. The snow crunched under her boots. She didn't lower the gun. "I told you I wasn't useful," she said, her voice carrying across the silent yard. "I lied." A low rumble vibrated through the ground. Lachlan trotted to her right side, his golden eyes burning with a mixture of pride and murderous intent. To her left, Kieran shifted. He rose to his feet, human now, clutching his side but standing tall. He wiped blood from his mouth and took his place beside her. Fire and ice, and Harper, the storm that brought them down the mountain. "You think you can kill me?" Roderick sneered, though his eyes betrayed his terror. He looked around at the ring of obsidian wolves tightening the circle. "I am the alpha of the Stone Creek Pack. I own this land. I own you." "You own nothing," Lachlan said. His voice was a deep, terrifying baritone that seemed to vibrate in Harper's chest. "You forfeited your land when you poisoned ours, and you forfeited your life when you touched what belongs to us." Roderick's face twisted into a mask of pure malice. He realized there was no escape. The mercenaries were gone. His pack had surrendered. He had no leverage, no power, and no dignity left. "I made you, Harper," Roderick screamed, his sanity fraying at the edges. "Your father sold you to me. You are property. My property." "I am not property," Harper said softly. "I am the consequence of your greed." With a feral shriek of rage, Roderick lunged. It was a suicide run, a desperate final attempt to take something down with him. He pulled a concealed knife from a sheath taped to his ankle and sprinted toward Harper, the blade flashing in the moonlight. Harper didn't flinch. She didn't even pull the trigger. She didn't have to. The Mercer twins moved as one entity. Lachlan intercepted Roderick first, catching the man's wrist in mid-air. There was a wet, loud snap as Lachlan twisted, breaking the arm like a dry twig. Roderick screamed, the knife falling harmlessly into the slush. Before Roderick could draw breath to scream again, Kieran was there. He drove his shoulder into Roderick's chest with the force of a battering ram, shattering ribs and collapsing a lung. They threw him to the ground at Harper's feet. Roderick landed hard, wheezing, pink froth bubbling from his lips. He tried to crawl backward, but his body was broken. He looked up at Harper, and for the first time, the arrogance was gone. Only the pathetic fear of a bully who had finally met a bigger fist remained. "Mercy," he gurgled, reaching a hand out toward her boot. "Harper, please, I'm your alpha." Harper looked down at him. In her mind, she saw her father, broken and drinking himself to death to forget what he'd done. She saw the graves of the wolves Roderick had turned into hollows. She saw the years of fear she had lived under. Slowly, she lowered the gun. "No," she said, her voice devoid of pity. "You're just a man who forgot that winter always comes." She stepped back, turning her gaze to the two men standing like sentinels on either side of her. Kieran, battered but unbroken, watching her with awe. Lachlan, fierce and protective, waiting for her command. "He's yours," she whispered. The Mercers didn't hesitate. In the world of wolves, there are no courtrooms. There are no juries. There is only the law of the wild. Roderick had lived by violence, and tonight he would die by it. Harper turned away as the twins descended. She didn't need to watch. She walked toward the open gates of the compound, lifting her face to the night sky. The clouds were parting, revealing the stars. Behind her, the sound of justice was wet and final. Then there was silence. The reign of Roderick was over. The wolves of Dead Man's Drop had claimed their victory, and Harper Vance had finally claimed her freedom. So that is the saga of Harper and the Mercer twins. From a fugitive freezing in the snow to the queen of the largest pack in the north, Harper proved that sometimes the safest place to hide is in the arms of the monsters everyone else fears. What did you think of the twist with the hollows? And would you have forgiven Roderick, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of danger, betrayal, and romance, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story. We have a spicy vampire drama coming up next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, listening, and see you in the next video.